Okay, everyone. So let's start. Good afternoon and welcome to 202B, 213B. So, as usual, I'm going to spend a little bit of time going over how the course is structured, and then rest of today's lecture is basically going to be kind of introductory material as to what set of topics we'll be covering. So let's kind of go through some of these things. There are many familiar faces out here, so you know how to reach me. Those of you don't, the information is out here. Um, uh, so the course itself, so this course is part of our embedded systems sequence. And those of you who attended my 202A, if you recall, kind of a lot of focus there was how embedded systems are put together and on essentially time aspects, like how do you schedule things and things like that. This course is complementary in the sense the focus here is on the other very important resource that characterize a lot of computing systems now, and a lot of systems, non-computing systems where sort of computers are a part of, and that's energy or power. So in a nutshell, this course is about how we can design systems while effectively managing energy so that we meet some goal. That goal could be either enhance battery life or could simply be to lower the energy consumption so that you are more environmentally friendly, sort of say. So, energy management can happen at multiple scales. And to kind of get a complete picture of what's happening, both whether you are designing a system and you want to make things upfront energy efficient, as well as you have a system and you want to operate it, that's more of a software view, you want to operate it so that it runs more efficiently. One sort of has to look through the whole energy pipeline, so to say, which is where does the energy go? Kind of a very basic question. So when a system is running, energy is consumed in some operations, and that's kind of ultimately is consumed by hardware. So kind of trying to understand that. How is energy produced, and wherever you're getting the energy from, could we do that more efficiently? So for example, batteries, which many of our systems rely on, they ultimately are also complicated systems, and how you use them in the sense that the way you take energy out of energy storage or an energy producing system affects how much juice you really get out of it. So we'll see some of that also. And finally, sort of how you actually end up consuming do useful work with that energy. The goals for your energy may be, as I mentioned a short while ago, may be diverse. So commonly associated one is we just want long battery life, and that's certainly true for tiny devices, laptops, things like that. It's also true for big devices like electric vehicles and kind of the whole concept of range anxiety being there. But that's not the only goal behind energy. It's also just being sustainable in the sense that designing systems so that the footprint, environmental footprint or carbon footprint is minimized. In many other cases, the goal may be thermal in the sense you don't want things to run too hot. That could be an issue. So imagine, for example, let's say we were to magically have some sort of a battery which can provide infinite power and energy in your cell phone, but that doesn't mean you can actually use that because in that tiny little volume, your ability to dissipate heat is limited, and sooner or later, the temperature will rise to a level where it would be very uncomfortable. And oftentimes, for many of these devices, that's already the case. And then thermal, in turn, translates into something about cooling. So if you look at, for example, data centers, where lots of computers are packed in a very tiny volume, every watt that you consume computing, a couple of watts or whatever, something equivalent ends up being spent in removing the watt that you consumed and then dissipated as heat. So there is a whole cooling system which comes into play in many devices as well. In many cases, peak power is the consideration. So for example, let's take our electrical grid. It's very expensive. It's designed with a certain amount of upfront investment, and but then suddenly during, let's say, summer days, we all turn our ACs on, and the peak demand goes up, and that cannot be sustained. And you cannot design your system and have all those dollars tied up while designing for the peak case. Much like computers, if you were to only design for the peak, then on an average it will be idle most of the time, and you're essentially wasting. So, which is why power companies in many cases, for not for us at home, but for industrial users, when they charge for power, they charge as kind of two functions. There is how many joules you have consumed, but they also charge according to what was the peak watt you consumed sometime during that billing period, and that's kind of a penalty component because they have to design the system, namely generators, wires, whatnot, everything for the peak load. So there is peak load is an issue. And then finally, cost. In many systems now, a huge part of the life cycle budget, sort of say, and that holds true for our computers as well, actually is in the form of energy, which is done. In fact, again, for data centers and all, that tends to be a big issue. So many different aspects, and not all of them we'll get to cover, but kind of the hope is that some of these we do. The other part is that it's not simply an issue of making our computers more energy efficient, namely just the CPUs. We also are, within the computer you have memory, storage, things like that. They present different challenges. Display, for example, a big part of a lot of these devices is actually the power goes into the display. As well as these things are connected, so network equipment consumes a lot of power, and increasingly there's a second way computing and energy meet each other, which is computers are part of many physical systems, and that gives us an opportunity to make those physical systems more energy efficient. Okay, and electric vehicle is a great example. Tesla often says this thing that that these electric cars are software which happens to have wheels. So that view that computing is penetrating these systems and therefore could beneficially be used. So IT, making information technology green, that's one view, and using information technology to make these other systems like our homes or vehicles and the electrical grid and all these things kind of be green. That's kind of other aspect. So we'll look at both, but the emphasis of the course is certainly on the former. I would say roughly 2/3 on the first aspect, making computing, networking, information technology green. But we'll also look into this perspective, how we can make use of information technology to make other systems better in terms of energy. What my hope out here is to really kind of go after some of the principles that underlie energy management, and what I'm not going to cover out here are things which are lower layer, and by that what I mean is that we are not certainly one of the ways of making things more energy efficient is that the underlying hardware is more energy efficient, right? I mean, if we had electronics which didn't consume energy at all and did the computation, that would be fabulous. But that's topic for other courses, whether that can be done or not. Certainly, chemistry and physics and kind of some of these foundational things have a huge role to play. When it comes to energy. So we're not going to cover those. And likewise, there's a layer above us which really has to do with a lot of societal, legal, economic kind of issues. Certainly, for many problems, you could imagine that the solution may actually be legal or financial. Like, for example, if you're like a power company, I gave the example of peak power. We could design systems which have lower peak power, but you could also imagine that there is a penalty rate that power company imposes, and then we will ourselves modify our behavior. And looking at energy very broadly, that certainly is the thing. Energy consumption also, again, beyond information technology in all many cases, it's present in many other ways, which again we will not cover. Like, for example, we consume energy by running gasoline-equipped cars, or whenever take our water system, water is pumped, shipped, all those things. So again, there are many aspects of energy which we are not going to cover. And one of the aspects which also boils down to is that that oftentimes, again, this goes to the last issue, that when one system is made more energy efficient by, let's say, economic means, people may change their behavior and start using something else. So if I make one thing very expensive, one form of energy very expensive, then people may modify their behavior. So there's a whole bunch of higher level issues which also one has to be aware of. But again, beyond the beyond the scope of this course. Okay. I think pretty much anyone, I don't know, anyone on the waiting list? There is no waiting list, but anyone? Okay, you. Okay, you're in. I think by end of today, many of you will drop out, so we'll probably just have a slot anyway. I also saw are there 2 undergrads in the class? Enrolled from CS213B? You too. Okay. So you know what you're getting into. Okay. Come and chat with me after the class. Okay. I just want to make sure. Okay. Those of you are EE students, which is a lot of you are, please do not enroll through CS213B. It's only for CS students because I will not be giving you grade towards your MS Comprehensive otherwise. So you have to make sure you enroll through 202. Okay. So what will happen in the class itself? We'll have a few homeworks, kind of more problem solving. So these are not like 202A type massive programming homework. So this is just to make sure you listen to the lectures and kind of apply some of those concepts. There may be some programming, but it's not like program hardware kind of stuff. Okay. Paper summaries and presentation. So this is going to be kind of the key component. This area is sort of still very researchy in the sense that a lot of activity and all that's happening every time I teach this class, things sort of change. But the other part is that a lot of interesting information and all is really in papers as opposed to there being any textbook. So what we'll do is starting maybe late week 2 or early week 3, just to give kind of an initial thing. I'll basically for every lecture, I will have some assigned paper, and all of you will have to read the paper and submit a 4-slide summary, a 4-slide submission on that. So I didn't mean to say 4-slide summary. So the way it will be structured is, first slide should be a summary of the paper. Second slide should be what you think are the strengths of the paper. Third slide should be what you believe are the weaknesses of the paper. And fourth slide would be your ideas and thoughts on the ways in this work can be extended or applied elsewhere and all kind of. Okay, so the intent out here is to learn how to critique a research paper and not simply kind of summarize what is in there. So that would be just the first slide. So again, the summary part here is kind of a misleading one. Okay, so 4-slide summary plus review plus critique of the paper. Okay. And then for each paper, I'll also designate one student. So I think I'm hoping by the time the dust settles, I'll be down into 20s or so students. So right now, I think there are 35 or so. So basically, once during the quarter, you'll have to prepare slides for the paper. So this is an addition to your 4-slide, which you have to do every time. And for this, some combination of, oftentimes slides are already out there. You can contact the authors, get the slides, make your own, depending upon your luck and author's cooperation, that may happen. Sometimes papers may be too new for the slides to exist. Sometimes they may be too old for the slides to exist. Okay, so, but it's perfectly fine if you kind of contact the authors, get some slides, modify them and all, but it would be your duty to once for one of the papers during the quarter to come up with that presentation. You'll make the presentation, but then the discussion on that will be led by one of the randomly selected students using his or her 4-slider. Okay, so it's kind of my way of making sure that you actually read the paper. Okay, the slide summaries would be due morning of the day of the lecture. So just for a few hours for me to just accumulate them. So the idea would be these papers will usually relate to a topic we would have covered 2-3 lectures prior. Okay, so they will complement, but just with a phase lag. So fair bit of credit for that, partly because there is work involved in that. I mean, you'll probably end up reading 20 to 30 papers and writing these reviews. So that's a fair bit of work. Okay, and there's a course project. Could be done in individual teams of any size. I don't really care much. One of the things, unlike again, those of you who are in my 202A, in 202A, I explicitly prohibited any project which was a review-oriented project. That is, everything had to be some sort of do software, hardware, data, something like that. Here, I would also consider very serious reviews of the literature, and I do really mean serious. Okay, this is not something that in the last week or two you can just put together kind of thing, but a very thorough survey of the literature on some energy related topic. Okay, which you'll have to obviously get approved and discuss with me fairly soon. And to make sure that it is serious, there would be a minimum report page requirement on the reviews, which would be substantively longer than kind of the regular projects. Okay, so that's there. Okay, I don't expect any grading changes, but just in case, cover my behind on this one. Research paper presentations, I've already talked about it. So most papers, pretty much all papers, I expect to be single student, but there might be occasionally like a journal paper or something like that, which may be too much for a single student, in which case I'll assign it as a two-person paper. So I already talked about the way we'll kind of structure this thing. Course project, you can, so that's your opportunity to sort of go into some area in more depth. Basically anything energy related, okay, and whether it be how to make your home more energy efficient, or your car more energy efficient, or your computer or your phone, or questions like where was energy really going, or things like how can I make things more efficient, and like I said, also a very serious review kind of stuff would also be acceptable out here, but again, sort of have to sort of discuss with them. So coming up with a topic is your responsibility. I'll be throwing out some topics over the next couple of weeks as kind of possible ideas. I'll also post topics which were covered in previous courses as well. I do encourage to form teams to kind of do something interesting. May relate to your research if you are in a research group or something, but it has to be something which you were not already doing, and sort of the usual caveats apply. Okay, so no double dipping basically. Okay, so timeline by end of week 3, whether you are doing a review or you are doing a project, I would like to have that topic finalized. And the way sort of it would work is that you'll basically have to create a simple website which would also serve as a report, where on a weekly basis you'll update, you'll put sort of material that is relevant, and sort of share that with me. So that would be the idea. So in terms of the 45% which is towards the project, we'll split it as quality and effort, 10% bulk of the grade, 10% for presentation demo. You could do this presentation in class or record it. Since this is going to be just before the summer break, so I don't want many of you want to leave early, and frankly, so might I. So kind of the idea is that we'll schedule some of these things in class during the last week, but the others you can do a recording as if you're speaking to me, but and just send me a YouTube link or something like that, okay, along with your demo. So this way you don't have to sort of plan your summer departure around this thing. Project website would serve as a report, but that does mean that your project website should be reasonably polished. Okay, I mean, this is and keeping it up to date. Okay, more project guidelines. Yeah, you can again read it up. So UCLA is kind of going through this transition of multitudes of systems by which courses are run and how they're evaluated, as well as a lot of us like to use things like Piazza also. So primary resources on this course. So we're going to rely on CCLE, which I'm sure by now you have used for the past couple of quarters, basically for the homework submissions. Okay, so that's what I use it for. So look at that. EE department does not use these systems for course evaluation. For course evaluation, you'll have to go to EE Web and do it. So I'll remind you closer to the date. We don't use the university system for that. The primary web presence is really going to be Piazza. You should have received an email from me, and if not, kind of the links are out here. Sign up for them. So basically, I'm going to post things there, and I'm also recording the lecture, so you would have access to recordings as well. No textbook. Besides being too pricey, I think there's nothing useful out there. So as I already said, we'll basically be relying on the papers that sort of constitute some of the work out here. And the way my lectures kind of take care of what I would term as sort of classical concepts that have emerged by now. So the papers we'll be studying or presenting are going to be more kind of the recent kind of work which has emerged. There are a bunch of courses elsewhere, and in fact, we often sort of exchange material and all across kind of these instructors and all. So when you're looking for project ideas and all, they're often a good place to hit. You might find some interesting project opportunities there. And again, some more links to conferences and things like that, where again, good ideas can kind of emerge. There's a lot of standardization work also happening around this space. So some links out here. Some of it is more environmentally motivated. Some of it is more sort of genuinely from a technical low power kind of a perspective. Okay, so like for example, IEEE technical area on green computing, it's really kind of approaching it from a technical perspective, laying out standards and all. On the other hand, Energy Star, which I'm sure you would have seen in some products and all, this is a government agency which kind of just rates things in terms of the energy efficiency, and they're pretty influential, and there's a European counterpart to it as well. Cheating plagiarism, again, you know it very well. Don't do it. That's all I would say. Again, unfortunately, every class, grad or undergrad, that I have taught almost always ends up having a case or two. So what I would always urge is that sort of just when in doubt, consult me whether something is acceptable or not. Okay, because a lot of kind of activities that go on in grad classes do depend upon an honor system of sort. Okay, so. But bottom line, whenever you are passing someone else's work as your own, that's not fair. I'll probably have some travel over the course of the quarter, and we'll schedule around them. Okay, so before I move on to the main lecture, questions? No? Okay. So this slide set is basically kind of looking at the broad landscape of energy and what kind of issues are there, and sort of things that we'll go deeper into over the course of the quarter. Needless to say, sort of energy is supremely fundamental. I mean, just without it, really, nothing can exist, I guess. And in computing and electrical engineering, when we deal with information, underlying that, I mean, even kind of Shannon's capacity theorem, all these kind of things and all, there is always energy present. You cannot compute without energy. Okay, so so processing of information, transportation of information, storage of information, all of these things fundamentally at a physical level do get tied to energy. In fact, Richard Feynman kind of has besides his famous lectures in physics, also actually used to work quite a bit on fundamental energy limits of computing, kind of the basic question on how much energy do you need to do some computation, and how much energy do you need to do communication. So he actually also has a book on physics of computation. So a lot of people have approached these things from both very fundamental perspective to also very practical perspective. I mean, over the past 10, 12 years, the whole computing industry has been driven less by speed and more by energy, because our ability to dissipate energy and also the emergence of mobile devices kind of really changed the picture quite a bit. So energy and power related challenges are obviously there. They're all over the map, and I think pretty much the number 1, 2, 3 wish list on our portable devices always is that they don't have enough battery life. Okay, I mean that just goes without saying. And in fact, like even as these smart bands and watches and all are emerging, kind of a big ding against them right now is that while they are kind of giving some cool functionality, but the flip side is that they are struggling to achieve a day worth of life. Apple iWatch specs are in mixed usage, it will give you around 18 to 19 hours of battery life, which is not even a full day. And then interestingly, a lot of these things supposed to monitor your sleep and all, but then that's the time you're probably going to recharge them anyway. So quite unsatisfactory. Then the complementary thing also is that in larger scale systems, the footprint is just huge from a societal perspective. So that's just sheer energy generation. So systems at all scales and all types, and both kind of our IT systems consume energy and physical systems compute energy. How much energy do you think we consume through our computers as a society? Like what percentage of? No, not that bad. Yeah, so it's around 6-7% or so, and it's more than airline industry collectively. Okay, I mean, I guess just a few big planes, but there are lots and lots of tiny devices and all which kind of collectively add up. So in the aggregate, it's quite a bit, and in recent years, those of you who follow news, you might have seen articles about concerns about data centers, that how sort of they have emerged as big energy hogs, and that's kind of an issue. So that's certainly thing. Then, as I also mentioned, there are a lot of physical systems which are getting more and more, if you may, essentially they are software wrapped around some physical package which doesn't look like a computer. Okay, so our cars and all are increasingly like that. In fact, I was once, this was a couple of years ago, I think, there was a keynote talk at some computer science conference, and the speaker was from BMW, and they were describing their self-driving car, and the energy bottleneck for them was the computers which were sitting in the car and burning many tens of kilowatts of power, because this is just humongous amount of sensor processing and all that they were having to do. Now, of course, that's going to change. More recent car I saw at Stanford, their 3 kilowatt of computing, driving a fairly sort of sophisticated car, a lot of sensors and all, a lot of processing thrown in. So many physical systems also have hidden in them computing, which consumes energy. That's part of it. And then, of course, these systems themselves consume energy, but that perhaps we can better manage. So one of the things that sort of are tried to, which is across these different systems, within computing, we have CPU, memory, display, networks, and then beyond computing, we have all these other physical systems. Are there any unifying themes? Like, for example, faced with a system which consumes energy and you're worrying about managing the energy, is there some way we can systematically kind of approach these things? Are there some common underlying principles that kind of hold true? So hopefully, I think there are, even though these are not necessarily always presented. I mean, sort of there are different communities and all, but I think there are some shared ways between them on how energy and power are managed, which is good to get an understanding of. So how do we cope with these energy challenges? So very first thing is, ultimately energy is consumed by some physical hardware or some mechanical thing or some electrical thing, right? I mean, something has to happen to sort of consume energy, and you could certainly make that lower power more efficient. So we could design more efficient electric motors in case of cars, more efficient HVAC systems in case of building, or more intrinsically lower power consuming components, transistors, gates, stuff like that, hard drives, whatnot. So one could certainly do that. One could also, another sort of viewpoint, perhaps a more business-friendly viewpoint, would be that perhaps we could just make more energy available. And in many cases, sort of energy which is more clean, perhaps, or energy which is homegrown, as in so that you are not dependent upon other countries and all. So one could certainly imagine that, and I think a lot of people, sort of for a variety of reasons, believe in that direction. That instead of trying to make things, instead of solving the problem on the demand side, could we solve it from the supply side? Smarter use of energy, and that's in some senses what this course is going to focus on, which is could we, given wherever the state of technology is by way of hardware and whatever energy is available, could we avoid wastage? Could we better match demand to supply? And could we leverage intelligence that information technology provides so that we can have overall sort of a better managed system, less wastage? If you sense what is happening, perhaps you can operate the system better, things like that. So kind of the center of gravity of this class is really kind of on the bottom end of things out here. Okay, so many forms of energy concern. This is something that I mentioned earlier also, but let's dive into them. So a common one which we think of when we talk about power and computing and all, really we kind of think about our tiny devices. So we have limited energy supply. Perhaps you're operating off stored battery, but you could also imagine that there might be other forms of limitations on energy supply. Can you think of some other, besides the fact that we are operating with battery? So second one, which is energy harvesting. It's very common now, which is many systems, we scavenge energy from the surroundings, and that puts a limit. So you may have a system operating off solar cell or wind or things like that, or motion. Many body-worn sensors nowadays are trying to scavenge energy which is available from human motion. People are making implantable stuff which rely on thermal energy scavenging, things like that. So energy limitation or limit on how much power or energy is available may come from either because you have a stored storage battery which you can only recharge at certain times, or they may come from the fact that while you may not have a storage, but your supply is not an assured one like being plugged to the wall outlet, but rather something which is intrinsically intermittent. You cannot control. It's going to happen because of other factors. And usually these two get combined, so you use storage to compensate for intermittency. So batteries become kind of like a buffer, and whatever you are grabbing your energy from becomes an intermittent source. There is peak power limits on supply, so it's something I already mentioned. They exist in every system. Ultimately, power or energy has to be carried or stored, and these systems put limits. In effect, there is a limit on the rate at which you can supply energy, whatever thickness of the wires and things like that, and the amount of generation capability that you will have. So there might be limits on that, and that's what results in this concept of peak pricing, which is by explicitly bringing the peak usage, basically the peak current, peak rate at which energy is being supplied as a factor into your equation, then you can hopefully kind of account for these things. Thermal considerations, they get pretty interesting. So there is cost associated with heat dissipation. This should be cost. Cost associated with heat dissipation. How is heat dissipation done in computers? Yeah. Huh? Fan is one. Okay, but my iPad doesn't have fan. So what does it do? Huh? It has what? Oh, sink, heat sink. Okay, yeah. So essentially something with big thermal inertia, which can kind of grab, big heat storage, big specific heat, which can kind of grab heat and kind of dissipate it out in a large surface area. So you would see if you open up your computer and all, there are a combination of these things. There is fans, there are heat sinks. What else? Water cooled or liquid nitrogen cooled or stuff like that, right? I mean, that's what happens when sort of more high-end stuff, or people who are doing whatever overclocking and things like that. They kind of end up doing But all of these things have costs. There are also issues of things like certain technology like fan noise. The cost can be tremendous, and particularly in things like data centers and all, where they really have to design very specialized HVAC systems and all to kind of dissipate the heat away. Thermal runaway. This refers to the fact that in most electronics, so they dissipate heat. That heat, if you don't remove, temperature will go up. As the temperature goes up, to do the same thing, more heat is produced. Okay, so essentially, power for doing a computation or energy dissipated in doing an operation increases with temperature. So if you are not effective in removing the heat, then you end up in this vicious cycle where every joule that you are producing is raising the temperature because you are not able to move it away in time, and therefore the next operation you do produces even more heat, and you kind of have this thermal runaway, and eventually things whatever get damaged or smoke or whatever. Okay, reduced lifetime. Things when they run, a lot of our systems, when they run at higher temperature, they age more quickly. This is true not just for mechanical systems, but also for electronic systems. They affect the age of the transistors, basically. So your chips die sooner, in effect. So there's reduced lifetime, reduced reliability, as in they'll be more error prone, as well as impact on the performance. So there are all these factors which kind of also, from a different perspective, this is these things can happen in any computing system, not just those which are battery powered, but they are very valid energy considerations. So computing is not just purely mathematical function operation. In part, it is a physical operation that you are doing, and therefore it has physical side effects, and it produces heat and consumes energy, and all of these things kind of end up mattering things. Interesting paper that I saw recently, or whatever, I didn't read the paper but read about the paper, some work out of Israel, where so this had to do with extracting information from air-gapped computers. Anyone knows what air-gapped computers are? Have heard of term? Nope, never. No.
Like actually physically separate, right?
Right, they're not on a network. Okay, so they are air-gapped to the internet. Okay, so they're used for whatever purposes where you don't want anyone snooping and all. Okay, so how can you extract information? So what these guys showed was, so they had two computers next to each other, and somehow you managed to infect the air-gapped computer through a USB stick or whatever. There's malware running on it, and you want to communicate information out of it, except that you are not allowed to connect. All the ports are, like, usually they're kind of locked in some metal thing, and also you cannot sort of access them. So what these guys were doing were they were thermally communicating. So they would place the other computer next to this. These computers have thermal sensors. On the air-gapped computer, they would basically deliberately heat the computer up for a 1 and cool it down for a 0 by essentially running heavy-duty computation, which would cause the temperature to rise, the nearby air to get heated up, which the temperature sensor in the nearby computer would pick up. They were able to get a few bits per hour of communication speed through that, but point is that it sounded pretty cool. Okay, so that was kind of a usage of thermal aspects, but more on a more serious tone, people who do sort of higher end of computing, particularly data center computing and all, they have to worry about these thermal considerations quite a bit. So in fact, the way you sent a search query or are doing some accessing some service in the cloud, which blade in which rack in the data center is it getting assigned to, depends on a huge part on thermal considerations. In fact, to the extent that they run real-time models of the entire data center's thermal behavior, they put temperature sensors and all, they keep track of things, and then decide. Part of the reason is that when you look at a rack, I'm sure you've seen all these pictures where rows of racks. There's a rack in which there are a lot of blades, and the air supply sort of comes from the floor, and sort of hot air rises up, it's sucked out, again cooled, comes back in. The amount of cooling capacity that's available to different computers depend upon where in the rack they are and which row and which specific rack they are in. So the thermal behavior of every blade is really kind of different, and what is running nearby. So even things like scheduling of these jobs and all take into account that what would be the thermal impact of running this thing, and thermal impact not just simply in terms of temperature and all, but the fact that it would also eventually cost you dollars. That's all needs to get taken accounted for. And the final one is sustainability considerations. This basically that we want to make information technology something which is has less of a environmental footprint. So that's kind of how green is something. That's kind of another aspect of it. So when early on, some of these considerations out here, which kind of see the bottom four, are things which are more which sort of came later, if you may. But the initial one, even starting early 90s, when kind of cell phones began to emerge and all, battery life aspects kind of came very early on, and an initial kind of and skeptical feel. I mean, early days of this thing is, but do we really need to worry about it? Will not Moore's law simply kind of take care of it? Every year we are used to better and better hardware. Is that sufficient? And turned out pretty soon, unfortunately, not. So part of the reason is that a lot of critical aspects of our systems do not scale the same. While they may have some exponential behavior, but the exponents are just way too weak to benefit us. So in case of battery life, one of the things obviously matters is battery. And what this plot, and there are versions of this ended in 2002, but you can extrapolate it, basically looks the same. What you see out here is that how rapidly kind of things, other aspects of our computing systems grow, but batteries have basically grown at the rate of roughly 1.5% kind of thing. And the reason is battery technology is not a continuously improving thing in a way, in the sense there are new battery chemistries come along once in a while, then you see a big jump, and then again they kind of plateau. So I guess in my lifetime I have seen batteries go from zinc air type stuff, which when I was really very young, to alkaline, to NiCads, to nickel metal hydride, to lithium ion. So roughly once a decade. Okay. And that's where things kind of stand. It's unlike so this notion that every year we have a factor of 2 improvement, or every 18 months a factor 2 improvement, certain holds true for a lot of other things, and even there it has begun to plateau, but not out there when it comes to energy supply. They have improved very, very slowly historically. So again, they increase, I mean, needless to say, and there are other improvements. So to give you an example, lithium ion batteries, which have been used quite a bit in laptops for the past decade or so, they have improved tremendously, but they have improved in various other dimensions. So to give you an example, earlier days, lithium ion batteries, they would have higher degree of impurity in the batteries themselves. But over years, they managed to make the kind of the chemical inside the battery to be more pure. And the effect of that is batteries age less. Okay, so for example, if you look at laptops from 6-7 years ago, their batteries were usually rated at around maybe 300-400 charge-recharge cycles, and then the batteries were basically useless. You would buy a new one. Now they are around 1,500 to 2,000 recharge, okay, which basically means that you can afford to make these devices the way Apple does, which is non-replaceable batteries, because the lifetime of the product and the lifetime of the battery are roughly the same now. And that's why you are able to get away in a lot of things. Whereas, and the reason it happened is not because battery chemistry changed, It's the same lithium ion with the same energy capacity, but our ability to make effective use of it, they age less. They remain young longer, basically. The other area where, besides storage, is also kind of supply, and I think currently we are kind of going through kind of major technology change, technology improvement there also, which is solar voltaic panels. Again, these are made using silicon, and they are also benefiting from a lot of technology progress. Lot of progress happening, but again, nowhere near the same scale. So it's not like energy efficiency have improved factor of 2 every year. It's not like that. It's been improving, slow and steady progress. Lot of lowering in cost. A lot of it happening because cheaper manufacturing in Asia made things more efficient, things like that. But fundamentally, it hasn't changed the equation to this date. When it comes to large-scale energy storage, there really isn't any energy storage technology which is out there. And in fact, electric utility companies, which part of the reason they are unable to use solar energy and all effectively is because they need storage in the electrical grid to make that happen. Why do you think so? For using renewables in the electrical grid, the assertion I'm making is battery technology needs to also advance. It's nothing deep. I just want you guys to talk. Yeah, so you're on the right track. Okay, I mean, point is my energy source, I don't really have any control over it when it's going to come, right? In fact, so the energy availability is not aligned with energy demand. When we had generators, what happens is, let me ask, how do you think is energy demand met in the electrical grid? Let's say suddenly, I don't know, some event is happening or it's a hot day and we all turn on our ACs or whatever, okay? What do the power companies do? Right, so they have generators on standby. Okay, some generators are running, they're supplying energy. Some generators are on standby, so they're spinning but not connected. And then some of them are basically, okay. And then as the demand goes up, they're predicting literally what's happening over short time horizon, long time horizon, predictions at various scale. And then they bring these standby things. The problem is that the standby energy is often very expensive because you're keeping these costly resources there but not used. And the other part is often they are the dirtier type of energy also because that's the one you can bring rapidly. That problem gets exacerbated now when you are relying on solar cells and wind turbines and these kind of things. So to compensate for that, because so it gets exacerbated for a couple of reasons. So one is their energy is available when you don't know when, or you can try to predict. Certainly we can predict sunrise and sunset. We can predict short-term weather. We can do certain kind of things, but nevertheless, there's a fair degree of variation. That's one issue. The other aspect is the demand side of it. You have to predict the demand, and then you have to kind of match the two somehow. So batteries can help tremendously in that because you could imagine that during daytime you store the energy and then you use it nighttime, or some form of energy storage. It doesn't have to be battery. So kind of large scale energy storage. So there are many different ways that people sort of power companies deal with this thing. So one is, yes, if we had cheap storage, we can do it. Another type of energy storage is to pump water up, and during daytime when energy is there, so then you're storing energy gravitationally. Okay, there are also things where they heat things up. Okay, so some sort of a molten metal or whatever, and you're storing energy by heating things up. So that's your energy storage. Another way is to actually pay people to use the energy. Okay, so you lower the price so that things that would have consumed at night, people change their behavior. To the extent that there are times in the energy market where energy price is negative. Okay, what that means is that they will have you use energy, and they will pay you to use the energy. Okay, and the reason is because shutting things down and bringing it back up has cost associated. So energy price can even go negative. So anyway, point is that storage of energy is going to be very useful as well. Yeah.
If you have solar, can't you sell extra solar back to the grid?
You can. So that's actually part of the problem. So in California and some other countries and states as well, in California, power company is required to buy energy back from you, from your home. Okay. The problem is they have to buy whether they actually have a need for it or not, and that's the financially complicated thing for them. Okay. So yes, you can sell, but not just you can sell; they are actually required to buy it from you. Okay, so heat dissipation, that was the third facet we had talked about. So when things heat up, bad things happen. This is a chip which was overheated. So they smoke, really do smoke. That's why you have fans and heat sinks and all these kind of things. Most modern processors also have safety things built in. They shut down. I don't know if any of you ever encountered that, but basically if the fan is dead or whatever, soon the temperature will rise and it will thermally kind of shut down because to prevent damage to the system. There are also issues around noise and all. I mean, I think sort of computers with even a single fan, that noise can, when aggregated across many computers in office, can really kind of add up. It affects reliability, affects aging. As I mentioned, chips age. Every time you use a chip, as in it does some operation, there is a degradation in transistors, and that is accelerated if the temperature is higher. Thermal runaway, which I kind of already mentioned. This is a slide a few years old, as you can see from kind of feature size and all out here. But the main point wanted to bring out is that as Moore's law kind of kept shrinking chips, more and more transistors got packed in smaller and smaller area. And if you kind of work out the way things scale and all, what that basically boiled down to is that the watt per centimeter square, which is basically how much power, let's see, yeah, okay. So how much power you are dissipating from a unit area, it keep growing up, okay? And your ability to remove that heat is obviously things like fans and heat sinks and stuff like that, so it can do only so much. So the temperature, the energy dissipation and therefore correspondingly temperature rise began to happen, and this old slide kind of shows that how they were kind of hitting nuclear reactor and rocket nozzle level temperatures and all on chip. Of course, cannot happen and all, so what's changed? How do you think Intel coped with this issue of that? As Moore's law was making things, shrinking things, making them faster, we were kind of running into this issue that there would be kind of a thermal limit beyond which you cannot do it. So when you look back over the past few years of computing, what changed as a reaction to this? So to give you a hint, okay, so what do you think were the peak CPU frequencies available 5 years ago? 3 gigahertz, something 3. What are they now? Still the same. What changed? I mean, clearly we are getting faster computers in some dimension, right? So what changed? Number of cores, right? Yeah. So instead of making individual cores faster, you move towards multi-core computing. Okay, so bunch of things operating slowly, but more things begin to give power. There's another concept or term that you would hear nowadays quite a bit is something called dark silicon. Anyone heard of it? There have been many seminar talks on CSE in recent years around that. I see you shaking your head. Have you heard of it? No? Okay. So dark silicon refers to the fact that the stuff we can pack on the silicon, we can no longer afford to keep it active simultaneously. In the sense, all the transistors that we can have available on a chip, if we were to actually run them, that is, they were to actually do useful computation, we'll have a huge thermal issue. Okay. So the only way we can do stuff is to keep only some of them active at the same time. So a lot of ideas floating around that how we kind of make use of, how do we cope with it, how do we make beneficial use of these things. One kind of idea is that we actually use these dark silicon to put a lot of specialized processors. So processors which would be much better at doing some task than a general processor might be. So like for example, maybe whenever I have a workload employing, I don't know, playing a movie, then maybe I have an MPEG decoder there, but I don't need it most of the time, only when I'm playing the movie. So the idea is that I couldn't afford to use that silicon because of the thermal reasons. Might as well use it for the specialized processor so that on average then I come out ahead. Okay, so not just I have more cores, but I also have cores that are specialized, because in any case I will not be able to keep them alive, all of them, because of power reasons. So what began to change is that sort of somewhere towards 2008, 9, wherever, we began to basically move towards multi-core kind of architectures, and nowadays towards not just multiple cores, but multiple cores which are specialized to cope with this issue that even if I want, I cannot keep all that silicon active. Same these things, just like we are seeing it on, we're seeing these issues at processors at all scales. It's not simply a desktop or mobile, but kind of all over. Again, just to ask you, how much power do you think a typical laptop processor consumes? So that's on the high side. A server class processor would be around 100, 200 watt. Laptop class processor peak might go into that range, but you'll operate it slowly. How much power do you think your processor on the phone consumes?
4 or 5.
Yeah, a few watts. Okay. So I guess rough rule of thumb I would say is embedded type stuff, you're looking at order of 1 watt. Laptop class stuff, you're looking at order of 10 watt, so 10 to some many tens, and then server class stuff, you're looking at order of 100 watt. Okay, so this is kind of a good way of kind of thinking about it. I was recently buying a server for my group, and I was looking at the Dell specs and all, and they sell servers like they're all Intel processors, and you can see that besides number of cores and all, there are power efficient version, and there are, so you basically play the power performance game. Okay, and it's just part of the consciousness. They deliberately kind of market for lower power stuff, because for a lot of people, including what I was looking for, it was important that the server be lower power, because there are other ramifications. You can buy a high power server, but then you also will have to get electrical wiring done and all, which will defeat the purpose. So so server and storage, where lots and lots of stuff gets packed into a very tiny volume, these things have become extremely important. And what you are seeing out here is, again, on the left hand side, the heat load per product footprint, watt per square. Okay, so this, you can think of it as equivalent of this, which was for silicon area. This is now, by the time you are looking at an entire computer or whatever, racks and stuff like that. And again, you would see kind of same kind of stuff, continually growing kind of thing. Okay, we are able to pack more and more stuff. If you look at a data center or even one at UCLA, you will see early days there used to be so-called so-called rack computers. So these were flat computers, kind of they go into the rack. Then emerged so-called blade computers. Blade computers, kind of many of them get packed vertically, and they're really thin, and they essentially take whatever was sitting in a rack and they kind of mount it into a tiny volume. Great, because I save on the volume, but now suddenly I'm burning all that power in a tinier space, and therefore my heating load kind of goes up. So that's what's been happening, that for a variety of reasons, for space saving and just ability to pack more computing into a given building, so to say, we want to pack more stuff, but then we exacerbate the heat footprint. What all of this has translated into is that if you look at the way the higher end computing, data center computing evolved, it used to be that basically from a life cycle perspective, most of the cost used to be the actual hardware. Okay, but now increasingly, big part of the cost, and in fact, this ended a few years ago, is actually the cost goes into power and cooling. Okay, and when you look at the overall data center, they we'll talk about it later in the course, but they have metrics which kind of go after what is the data center efficiency in terms of energy uses. That is how much useful computing you are getting out of it, taking into account the overall energy. And the overall energy out here is not simply how many joules your memory and CPU are consuming, but also how many joules you are consuming in the cooling system to remove that heat. All of that needs to be coming. Early data centers were pretty pathetic in that dimension. So, like, for every watt you will burn, they will probably spend another several watts to remove that. So the overall cost was pretty high. In other words, your effective energy per unit computation was pretty pathetic. Now things have improved quite a bit. Another thing that data centers have done is they've also taken themselves off the grid. So a lot of the newer data centers, they also put renewable solar power, stuff like that, to kind of reduce the external grid footprint. But the other part, they they've been driving down efficiency quite tremendously. So final leg of that story is the sustainability aspect, and there is a lot of interest in this. So sustainability is this notion, kind of wishy-washy left liberal notion, if you were to be politically look at it from a political viewpoint, where it's basically about we want to create systems which do not leave things in a worse shape for our kids and grandkids than we had. Okay, that's in a sense what these statements are saying. Main point though is that increasingly there's a trend towards that cost of a system has to price in its footprint on the environment. Okay, and by that what we mean is it's not simply what you buy, but what it costs to make it, what it will cost to dispose it, and what it will cost to run it. And all of these have energy cost. Okay, there's energy cost in making something. So I could, for example, make a very efficient product, but if I were to make it using methods or materials which themselves consume a lot of energy in production, then I have negated the purpose. Okay. Many places some studies have shown that, you know how electric utilities now often give you incentives. Buy a more energy efficient fridge and they'll give you a few $100s off. What's the problem that usually happens? People buy the fridge, new fridge, use it in the kitchen, and take the old fridge and put it into the garage. Okay, the society as a overall is worse off in that case. It didn't really meet the purpose. The other thing is rapid changes. Rapid replacement. Let's say you are an owner of a relatively recent car. You want to be environmentally nice. You go buy a Prius. Now either you have a second car sitting as at home, or but then you not only while you are burning less with the Prius, but the energy which went into making the Prius also has to be factored in. So what that leads to is some sort of a break-even point, right? I mean, that is how many years would it take for you to run this more efficient system before you are kind of better off. So all these systems, are computers inclusive, have some sort of a break-even point where, because there is energy which went into their manufacturing as well. Energy consumption is growing, needless to say. One of the things that government agencies, so the US, there is this energy administration, what they do is they look at the overall societal flow of energy. So what you see out here is, on the left-hand side, different ways the energy comes into the American society. And then you see how it has been used in different ways. Okay, so for example, so it came in the form of petroleum, some of it goes into electric generation, that stuff is distributed, gets used in residential, commercial, industrial, transportation, all these kind of things, as well as energy which is lost. It's lost because every time you transport energy, there is an inevitable loss in wires and stuff like that happens. So so this kind of begins to give you an insight, at least from a policy perspective, where the problems are, where would be the bottleneck. So like, for example, looking at this, you can say, okay, residential sector, how much energy should be they target economic incentives and all. So sort of good insight which is coming from this, and a lot of people are kind of increasingly also looking into information technology being applied to improve some of these things. So when you hear about things like smart buildings and all, what people are going after is that, look, there is a very significant part of electricity consumption which is going into homes, and if we can do easy measures to improve that, there is sort of a huge impact. On the grid, huge amount. If you look at the overall electric grid, a lot is being actually wasted, and perhaps information technology, and that's where this whole notion of smart grid comes into play, that we could make, we can improve this component and thereby again have a societally useful kind of impact. There are people who are working on making the transportation network more advanced. So, for example, you might want to shift here if you want. Yeah. There's a project which Professor Mario Gerla's group out here has been doing, and some of the numbers I was reading, that an insane amount of energy, fraction of the energy, we waste on things like stop at the traffic light. I'm not encouraging you to jump red light, but point is that you stop and the cars are burning, as well as things like circling around to find a parking spot. A lot of these essentially sort of non-useful things that happen in a transportation system, they end up accounting for a very large percentage of wastage also. So a lot of work happening, mostly in sort of people who are basically finding that through acquiring the data, analyzing the data, and then controlling the system appropriately. In each one of these sectors, we can improve things. So this is kind of this secondary aspect of energy and information technology, which is making information technology help improve the energy efficiency of these various sectors. So let's talk about the magnitude of the problem in different, as well as what's the headroom which is there. So the first part, like I said, is to make information technology green. Make our computers green, make our communication systems green. Bottom line being that as they are, so part of it is make manufacturing greener. That is how you make these computers. I'm going to talk about that. But the other part, which is more of the focus out here, is that how to make their operation more energy efficient. So, so use energy more efficiently when operating, including the indirect effect. As I pointed out, cooling takes an impact, and as I kind of said, that in data centers it could be for every watt you consume, maybe another watt or two or few more watts go into the HVAC, so you have to account for that. Use little energy when idle. So this is a very important point. Anyone heard the term vampire power? Anyone? No? Vampire power.
Isn't that when like your TV is plugged in but it's off?
Yeah, or like, for example, I just leave my charger plugged in and it's sucking a teeny bit of power. So the system is off, but it's still trickling some power in from the supply. The problem is there are billions of these things and they add up. So vampire power refers to a power, or rather energy, that is consumed by a system when it is not doing anything, okay? When it's actually off. So use little energy when idle, and actually no energy when you are truly turned off. Use sources of energy that are clean and sustainable. So that sounds like motherhood and apple pie, but could software do anything about it? So let's take this one. Use sources of energy that are clean and sustainable. And let's say you are a data center, you're Apple running a data center, or whatever, some company running a data center. What could you do about this, which is purely from a software perspective? Any thoughts? When do you think the energy is dirtiest? When you get it from the grid? So let's just talk about electrical energy. When do you think is electrical energy the dirtiest? Let's say I consume a joule now, and I consume a joule at night, and a joule at early morning. Do you think they are all equally dirty?
Wait, what do you mean by dirty?
environmental footprint, carbon footprint, amount of carbon emitted for that joule. Thoughts, anyone? Huh? Yeah, so under what conditions do you think energy gets dirtier? When the demand rises, so we have to bring in these dirtier sources of energy online, and therefore things, okay? Of course, it's also affected by things like where you live, okay? If you are in an area where electric supply is more natural gas or things like that, versus if you're living in an area where it's coal-fired plants, okay, that makes a difference. But there's a time of day dependency. And what that suggests is that you could imagine, and there are actually people who have sort of created systems around this, where you can shift the computation workload. Computation work, all workloads have some elasticity or the other, okay, it may differ. So a search has to be done immediately, but perhaps other things could be done, could be delayed, okay? A payroll processing doesn't have to happen immediately, it could be done at a later point in time. So you could imagine that the scheduling of the tasks could be done at times when energy is cleaner, energy is cheaper. Maybe it could be done in a place where energy is cleaner, so you ship the stuff there over the network. So all those, so while it may sound like, oh, gee, this has nothing to do with software, but actually, this is fundamentally a scheduling problem. All these other stuff, okay, are dealing with other aspects of the lifetime. So make computing systems green, and the other part, like I said, is using these systems to make the rest of the world green. So making our cars more efficient, our buildings more efficient, and stuff like that. So we'll explore both, but again, kind of much of the course would be really about this first aspect. So let's look at the information systems as the problem. So this pie chart on the left kind of shows that if you look at the overall information technology sector's footprint, okay, so as in how much emission it has, and the emission is measured in terms of carbon dioxide that you're emitting. So this unit GTCO2 is gigatons of carbon dioxide, okay. So what you see roughly out here is that around 60% or so are being used by our, what you would loosely classify as desktop/office equipment type stuff, okay, peripherals, printers, desktop computers, and all. Around 25% or so is being used by sort of telecom infrastructure and devices which are part of the telecom infrastructure. This slide is a little bit old, so I think things have probably changed a little bit with smartphones and all, but kind of the broad picture is like this. And then finally, data centers account for roughly a fifth of these. Okay. The interesting thing which has been changing is that if you look at the footprint, if you look at a building, office building or kind of a building like this, the traditional notion has always been that most of the energy goes into where? Where do you think? HVAC, right? Heating, ventilation. So moving the air around, cooling it, heating it. Okay. It's more so in places with worse weather than ours, but nevertheless, that's the thing. What some of the studies are now showing also is that IT equipment is becoming a big part of it. Okay, so this is out of the CSC building in UC San Diego. So it's kind of a roughly a 10-year-old building, so relatively modern relative to, let's say, something like this. What you see out here is that roughly 70% of the load in this building, it's a CS building, so it's an extreme case, but 70% of the load, which is, I think this is black line if I'm not wrong, okay, it's really coming from the computers in this building, okay, office equipment. So that's the higher penetration of things which are happening. So loads are changing, and there are sort of very broadly, there is HVAC related stuff, there is lighting related stuff, and increasingly now the third leg is this information technology related stuff, which for certain kind of buildings becomes pretty important stuff. So this shows how things are changing in terms of IT-related emissions. So from a overall societal perspective, it's still a tinier part in the sense that if I look at all the places energy goes versus where kind of energy consumption is growing for the information technology, it's still kind of a tiny part, but it's growing rapidly. Global footprint by countries and also again similar kind of analysis people are doing, but one of the things which is happening again is that kind of the general story is that there is an increasing and a rapidly increasing rate at which things that you attribute to information technology. Okay, so by that what we mean is not just devices we have or computers, but also cellular towers, data centers, all this infrastructure which is IT related, that's becoming a larger and larger part of societal energy footprint, and it's increasing kind of at a rapid rate. I'm going to skip these slides a little bit. Okay, usually when people talk about energy and computing from a carbon footprint perspective, usually they're talking about data centers, and part of the reason is the sheer growth in data centers that have been happening and how much energy they sort of consume. So there have been a lot of articles and massive research efforts and all really kind of focused specifically on making data centers more efficient. So what makes data centers very interesting is that they are not simply a computer. They are not designed simply as I'll have a building and I'll put computers in it. It's actually computers and buildings kind of designed together. It's a very special purpose building with airflow and cooling and electrical delivery and everything, which is designed specifically for computing, and they really optimize it from an energy perspective sort of quite a bit. So some of it is simply reflected in kind of the rate at which server computers have been growing. If you look at the data center itself, okay, how they are changing and expected to change. So what you see out here is that the overall footprint can be decomposed into a whole bunch of stuff. The main thing that you will point out, so let's look at what's kind of expected out here. The servers themselves is roughly half the data center. So that's your actual computing, okay? And this, bear in mind, this is 2020, so by that time, sort of, they're projecting whatever advances have taken place and all. Half of it is the actual computing, and within this half, much of the stuff would actually be dissipated with heat. The remaining half is to sustain this half. So in this, you would see cooling systems, you will see power systems, you'll see storage-related systems, and some other stuff. Okay, but bulk of it, so a significant part of it is computing, but almost an equal part is this ancillary stuff. So cooling system is all the stuff which energy you are spending to remove the heat from this part. Power system is energy which is wasted while you are supplying the power to run this part as well as to run the HVAC system. And so what that translates into is every watt that I reduce out here on the computing side would mean I would have 1 watt less to remove on the cooling side, and therefore I can make my cooling system better, and I will have to supply a watt less, and that will make my power system, right? So a unit reduction on the computing side has similar beneficial effects and everything, so it just gets magnified all through. So this is one where this is a place where one has to kind of take this holistic picture. This is another take at this. So what you're looking at out here is at different scales, where does the energy go? So if you look at a data center scale, and this is from a different source, percentages are somewhat different, but you see that 40% is going into the IT equipment, 30% each is going into power delivery and cooling. Within the IT equipment, if you look at what's happening, roughly 60% is going into the computer, the CPU, if you may, CPU and memory. Around a fifth is going into the storage, so this is hard drives and stuff like that, and then 15% going into networking equipment. And then if you look at within this part, there is a CPU, there is memory, there is hard drives within this, so this is kind of the closer storage. There is power supply, so a big part actually goes into power supply, and there's a whole bunch of other, which is fans and stuff like that, other stuff. Just curious, so see how roughly, I don't know, maybe 35-40% is going into power supply here, and around 30% is going into power supply here. What's going on? Why do you think the power supply consumes power?
The fan?
Hmm?
The fan?
No, it's not the fan. Fan is part of your cooling system, right?
There is efficiency in maintaining the voltage.
So wires have resistance, right? I mean, so when you, or things in the electrical grid, or your right, they have efficiencies, okay? Or things like let's take this guy. How efficient do you think this is? Right? I mean, it's supplying power to my laptop. For every joule it supplies to my laptop, how many joules do you think it consumes from the grid? Yeah, these are, these are actually among the more efficient ones out there. These are around 85%, something like that. Okay, it depends also upon how much power they're supplying. Okay, I mean, they're more efficient. Clearly, if it is supplying zero power, that just shut down my computer, then it's infinitely inefficient, still consuming some energy. And then if it is taking out very large amount of power, I'm running some heavy duty stuff, again, it will be less efficient. There's going to be some peak efficiencies are around mid 80s or so. So excuse me. So what that means is that even in a system like this, 15% or so is being wasted. Okay, running the system. Then there is wastage within the process. Within the laptop itself as well, because this power, this voltage has to be cleaned up and things like that. So there's stuff going on. It's the same thing you are seeing out here at the data center scale. From kind of power coming into the data center, 30% is lost before it even hits your computers, okay? And this is a loss which is happening in that distribution infrastructure within the data center. And then within the system itself, we see like another 30% or so is being lost because of the power supply components that are in there. So by the time you add things up, I mean, there is a 30% here and then another 30% or 40% here. So sounds like roughly maybe 40% or so of the overall data center power is actually being wasted in the power system itself, which goes back to this point that every watt you save out here is actually going to have multiplicative effects all over. So that's one problem, which is if we were to be designing power efficient computing system, a very easy mindset is to focus just on this part, namely the CPU. How much is that? So CPU is 20%, 20% of 60% of 40%. Okay, so kind of add it together, that's like 10-12% of the overall power consumption. Okay, so just focusing on that is going to be extremely misleading. And what that suggests, therefore, is that kind of to really kind of make an impact, you have to have a good sense of where the problem is. The other thing is that all these other stuff are also kind of playing a role as well. And this is a server picture. How do you think this picture might differ for, let's say, my laptop? So this was for a data center component. Where do you think most power goes in my laptop? Thoughts? Screen, yeah. Specifically, what part of the screen? Lighting, backlight. Okay, yeah, because the screen is LEDs. Okay, so that's all it is just shutting on off transmission of the light. It's really the backlight, right? Which is kind of a huge thing. So for these kind of devices, okay, that's a big part, because a lot of times you're not doing any computing. Like right now, my computer, I think, other than the clock which is ticking and therefore changing a number, there's nothing else which is going on, right? I mean, but rest of it is just sustaining this view of an on computer. What about what else do you think consume a lot of power on my laptop? Wi-Fi radios, okay, and Wi-Fi is still good. By the time you head to kind of our cell phones kind of stuff and all, it's the cellular radio which is pretty darn power hungry. So one thing which also changes as we move down the scale of computing is where the power goes. Okay, so as opposed to CPU and storage kind of stuff, it begins to shift towards more like displays and radios and these kind of stuff, or sensors. On the cell phones, another very power hungry stuff is, anyone? GPS, yeah, GPS is hugely power hungry. I mean, turn the GPS on and all, your phone battery will probably die in a 3-4 hour time frame very easily. So the mix of power usage certainly changes, and again, one has to kind of reflect that as well. Now, a big problem in these things is, so again, sticking with the server side story, but to some extent for a lot of others, that our systems are insanely lightly utilized. So this was an issue that Google, which sort of got into data center scale computing very early, they brought out in a kind of a very well-known paper some years ago. So what you see out here is it's kind of like a histogram. So it's basically showing CPU utilization versus fraction of the time they are being utilized at that level. So this is average CPU utilization for 5,000 servers during a 6-month period. So what this is showing is that full utilization is a very rare thing. Most of the time, our CPUs are either in the sweet spot or actually lying idle. Okay, they're still on, but they are lying idle. And the other part is they are maybe sounds like the peak usage is around 30-40%. They're not 100% utilized. But there is a bump up out here, so there are perhaps some occasional nodes which kind of do it. Okay, so why is that a problem? Well, the problem arises the way our hardware behaves. Okay, so this would be fine if if the amount of energy or whatever the power being spent to sustain a particular level of utilization was proportional. What I mean by that is things would be fine if when the CPU was 100% utilized, it consumed 1 unit of power. And if it was 50% utilized, it consumed half a unit of power. And if it was not utilized, it was not consuming any power. But that's not how our systems are. Our systems look something like the following. Utilization versus power. And what you end up seeing typically is the following. So green is power, red is energy efficiency. Look at the green one. So it's basically saying that, look, when I'm running the system at peak capacity, I have some power consumption, let's call it 100. But then when I'm not running it at all, it's still consuming a fair bit of energy. Okay, 50% in this case. It's a notional graph, but point is, it doesn't go down to zero. Why do you think that happens? Thoughts? If I'm not doing anything on my laptop, is it consuming zero power? It's not. So where all is the power going? Come on, guess.
It's refreshing the RAM, right?
Okay, refreshing the RAM. Yeah. So why does that happen? RAM refresh. Anyone? Good point. Yeah. Yeah, you shouldn't speak. We just discussed the paper in our group meeting. Okay, so not you. Someone else. Not my students. So why is DRAM refreshed? Thoughts? Anyone? Huh? Yeah, leakage. So DRAM store data. DRAMs is what bulk of the memory is. DRAM store data in capacitors. Those capacitors leak, and therefore every few tenths of millisecond that data is rewritten. Okay, which is why DRAMs burn power. So you have to maintain their state. Okay. So that's one. You have to keep the state. So it's a broader point, which is when our computer is idle, it's not necessarily that we can afford to power it off. Okay, we still need to maintain some state so that when we come back, it's as if nothing happened. Okay, so DRAMs, it would be fine if we could afford to lose the content of the DRAM, but then we'll have to restart. So we have to do that. What else? What else do you think consumes power? Let's take our car as an example. Okay. Do you think if you were to plot um, uh, energy power that the car is consuming versus the speed with which it's moving, it will probably look something like this, right? Perhaps even worse. Okay, but point is when the car is stopped, it doesn't go down to zero. Okay, so just to keep things alive uh, takes power. In case of electronics, since most of you are EE students, so you should answer it. Where does the power go when my circuits are just alive? Thoughts, anyone? Power supply is one. We already discussed that, so terrific. You were at least awake. Anyone else? What else?
Charging capacitors.
No, I mean I could stop the clock, for example. Could, right? But
There are always small current.
yeah.
So the resistance in the circuits.
Yeah, so there's always this so-called leakage power. There's always some amount of current which is being drawn. Okay, as long as your electronics is powered up, it's going to consume some. Every transistor is going to consume some stuff, and multiplied by the billions of transistors is going to add up. Okay, so there's always leakage power, and that. So even if I were to stop, so certainly if I were to power off the system, it will consume zero power. Right? By power off the system and ignoring stupid adapters, but it's consuming zero power. But if my system is powered up but not running, I'll still consume because of leakage and all. I'll consume all that power going in. It's still significant, and it could be quite high, 30, 40, 50%. Okay, so that could be significant. Now, the problem out here is that if you look at the efficiency thing, it looks pretty bad. It basically says I'm pretty efficient when I'm highly loaded, but the computers are grossly inefficient when I'm poorly loaded. And that, coupled with this picture, which we saw, is the problem part of the story. That is, most of our servers are either idle or heavily underutilized most of the time. And by the way, their efficiency plummets as they're underutilized. So the overall thing boils down to is that our computing infrastructure, therefore, is operating in a pretty inefficient regime, basically.
I remember hearing that the ARM processors are significantly better than Intel with this problem, but I didn't quite catch why.
Yeah, I mean, some of it is true, some of it is marketing. Intel would disagree, so on and so forth. And it was certainly true, and I guess probably not true anymore because Intel has come out with its own processors. Not that I work with Intel or anything, okay, just to clarify, but just as a dispassionate observer. But yes, certainly ARM early on went after this lower power market, but not at the server. The server market is essentially an Intel market. Okay, ARM is still trying to penetrate there. But this issue that our systems, so two parts to our problem, right? One is that we design system with certain capacity, but we do not use them at the full capacity. And the second thing is that our systems are not energy proportional. That's a very important term, which is the amount of energy that they consume is not proportional to the performance setting they are at. Take this building. Is it energy proportional? How would you define energy proportionality of Bolter Hall? Occupancy, right? That's the service we are providing. Okay, so occupancy versus power. Do you think when the building is unoccupied, it doesn't consume any energy? No. So many stuff is still on, right? And it has to be on because the cost of shutting it and restarting would be a huge problem. And in many cases, it is simply they were not designed like that. Okay, I mean lights remain on. So there are some measures we take to improve energy proportionality. You can think about all these motion control lights. I mean, there's a motion sensor out there which kind of presumably turns this thing off when we are not there. So there are certainly attempts towards improving energy proportionality of this room. Is this room still energy proportional? Thoughts? Anyone? I don't think this thing goes off on its own. Maybe it does. I don't think this thing, it certainly does not. Okay, so there's clearly elements of this room which are just not designed to be energy proportional. The HVAC system is still there because there is no control over the HVAC occupancy of just this room controlling the airflow out here, right? So many of our systems were just not designed to be energy proportional, and so is the case with computers, that they are underutilized and they are not energy proportional, and the combination of the two doesn't make for a good system from an energy perspective. So what this thing shows is another thing, which is what is the idle to peak ratio of the power consumption. Okay, so what I mean by that is as a fraction of the peak power, what is the idle power? Okay, if my system is really good, idle to peak should be 0, right? I mean, I should consume 0. Okay, so this was some years ago, but again, for different servers, you are sort of seeing where they kind of stood in terms of this energy proportionality. So which one do you think is better from energy proportionality in this diagram? These two, right? The middle one, they are kind of better. Not by much, but they're better. Okay. So what all of this boils down to is that the key to energy proportionality is to make sure that not only your system does things well when it is actually doing something, but it's also doing nothing very well. That is, it's when it is idle or when it's not supposed to deliver anything, then it is accordingly lowering down its energy consumption. So in case of a building, that would mean is that if it is not providing any service, and the comment out here was occupancy is a good proxy for service. That's a debatable thing. Do you think for Bolter Hall, occupancy is a good measure of the service Bolter Hall provides? Any thoughts? Does the building still have to do something while no one is here? Okay, let's take something easy. Your home. Can we shut off the power to your home when you're not there? Fridge? Can't, right? Presumably also in certain climates you may want to maintain at least some limits on the temperature beyond which security system, right? So there are certainly things. So occupancy is not always, for buildings, occupancy is not always kind of the measure of energy. For computers, it's kind of similar. Okay, so let's take a server. If it is not in use, can I truly shut it off? Not really. It still has to wait for listening for network connections, for example. There's going to be some stuff which is perhaps still going on. So I think, but certainly, I mean, for building, starting with occupancy would be kind of a good way of starting. But defining whether you're doing something or not doing something can be trickier. Okay, so this whole idea that things have to be designed to be energy proportional, and that computers should be designed not just to do their sort of some higher level load very well, but also doing nothing very well, was something that sort of entered into the consciousness only after sort of in recent years only. Now, will IC technology alone helps? Unfortunately, it does not. So what certainly is true is that technology improves. I mean, obviously, if it wasn't improving, then we'll keep using the old one, right? So even from perspective of even if I care about power, things certainly keep improving. Speed, power, efficiency has indeed gone up, and another way of saying is that we do, for a same level of performance, we certainly do consume less power now than we used to. Okay, otherwise we wouldn't be using it. But it has certainly slowed down, and the reason it has slowed down is the following. If you go back to as maybe until mid-90s, it was performance. That was kind of the essential driving of electronics. But then mobile portable technologies came into being, and people started sort of that, we may have to design for power. And initially the mindset was, okay, that just means we will just run things at a slower frequency, and that's what constituted power. But then gradually the discipline of lower power circuits and all kind of emerged, and a lot of sort of one-time tricks and all people kind of brought into play. So there was a lot of initial sort of bag of tricks that people have applied uh, to make electronics more power efficient, but they are behind us. They were one-time gain. They gave us a one-time bump. Voltage reduction was kind of a huge thing. So if you look at electronics from early 90s, again, they used to operate at 5 volt, then moved to 3.3 volt, then moved to 2 pole, 1.8 volt. Nowadays, a lot of processors and all, at least internally, are operating at perhaps a volt or even smaller than that. So voltage has gone down. Later on, you will see that power is related to voltage, but voltage also affects the speed. So there's a combination. I can run things at a lower power, but then I'll get useful work at a lower rate. And it's the combination of the two which would be interesting with the measure. So we'll talk about it. But what has happened is this voltage reduction has plateaued. So if again sort of you're not seeing any further reduction, because we really cannot have, because at that stage reliability begins to get affected. Reliability as in whether your computation would be correct or not, and also leakage that we were discussing earlier, that when you just keep things power off, now you're close, as the voltage has gone down, this leakage sort of current begins to go up. Then the third aspect is systems also include other components which may not follow IC technology at all. Okay, so our hard drives are mechanical, fans are mechanical, displays are okay. Part of them are still IC based, but lighting and all aren't necessarily. So there are a lot of other stuff in our systems which do not follow the same scaling that the processor is doing, and therefore they also kind of add up. So by the time you're going to put all of these things together, it's you cannot simply say, okay, IC technology somehow magically will give us this power proportionality or energy proportionality. It does not. So to make energy proportional systems, there are a couple of ways you can go around doing it. One approach is that we make every element of our hardware energy proportional. Okay, so if you think of an overall computer, we have CPU, storage, memory, fans, everything. We kind of try to make everything energy proportional. The problem is this is just essentially impossible to do, because, like we just discussed, not everything is electronic, and in any case, even ICs are not. So all these problems like leakage and stuff like that come into play. So the way you make something energy proportional really is to rely on statistical multiplexing. So what I mean by that is, while I cannot make a single server energy proportional, I can make a cluster of them energy proportional. So an entire data center to be energy proportional, while a single server might not be, because of all these issues that we discussed. So the tricks out here are things like, so let's say I want to make a cluster of 100 servers to be energy proportional. What I would do is I will try to keep just the right amount of servers powered up, some servers perhaps on standby, and the rest powered off, so they're not really consuming anything. And then perhaps through a combination of load prediction and all, we are going to manage how many servers are up or down. We kind of make our whole cluster give us an illusion of a proportional, energy proportional cluster, even though none of the individual components are energy proportional. Same thing you can imagine trying to do in other systems, like for example, laptops and phones nowadays have multiple cores. So you could imagine that at least insofar as the CPU is concerned, you could shut down the cores when they are not used, so that the overall CPU appears to be more energy proportional. You could play the same game with memory. Memory may be in multiple banks or multiple DIMMs. Maybe some of them could be shut down. So selective parts of the system could be powered off to begin to give us an illusion that overall system is energy proportional. But this manifests itself very well with things like data centers, where you have lots of resources to play with. In that sense, there is this technology of virtualization, which I hope all of you have used in some form or the other, which comes very useful because what it does is it virtualizes the hardware. What it means is that instead of running my software directly on a piece of hardware, we run it on a virtual machine, and that virtual machine could be moved around. So we abstract away the underlying hardware. To my software, it appears as if the virtual machine is always up, but the underlying scheduler is moving things around. We powered off unused system, but because we power off, when they wake up, it takes time to wake up. So we have to compensate for that slow wake up. We also have to make sure state is safe. So you oftentimes a few servers might be kept in a very small number can be kept idle but running, ready to come in for unpredictable load. But otherwise, you kind of monitor load, predict, shut things down, bring things back up, and give this illusion of energy proportionality. So the goal of energy proportionality then is to do it at the right scale, because the first approach of making everything energy proportional right down to the component level is just not generally not possible. How would you make a building energy proportional? So we agreed that it's not energy proportional. Thoughts?
Use only a small number of rooms and keep some rooms. Use only a subset of the rooms and keep some rooms empty.
Yeah, so you could imagine, for example, if instead of everyone having fixed offices where they go and work, I could have a pool of offices and then I direct people there. And I have seen these kind of systems in some companies and all, where essentially you're not assigned a desk, but rather you have a little whatever card where your stuff is locked in, and you go and take that stuff to whichever desk is free. Now, of course, you could imagine that at that time it could be done based upon consolidating things so that only a minimal number of things are kept up and running. So a lot of these problems essentially boil down to one of scheduling things intelligently so that you cluster them and keeping things off otherwise, and that's kind of the main strategy. So main concept to take away from today's lecture is firstly, so just to kind of recap, there are two facets to energy that sort of we're going to touch upon: improving the computing systems, and also we'll look at how computing systems can be used to improve energy of other systems. That's one part. The other thing is there are a variety of reasons we are interested in energy. Okay, battery life is one of them, but there are several other equally compelling ones: thermal runaways, peak power, just sheer cost, all those kind of things that we discussed. And the final thing is this notion that our systems currently are underutilized, and they are not designed to be energy proportional, and that combination gives to this pretty problematic situation where we are actually operating them in regimes where they are very inefficient. So a lot of work in this space really boils down to making our systems more energy proportional. Okay, that's kind of a good goal to have, and as we saw from this slide, the way of making something energy proportional by making everything is made of energy proportional, while that will solve the problem, it cannot be done usually. So the trick usually then is to give the illusion of energy proportionality by managing individual resources very well. So we're going to pick up on this theme and continue on day after tomorrow. See you guys.